We're going to focus a little bit now on the Jim Crow South and how African Americans were treated after the Civil War. Even though they're free, they're not necessarily equal to their white counterparts. We're going to focus on four particular people: Ida B. Wells, W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, and George Washington Carver. And here is a picture of the three main people we're going to be covering: Ida B. Wells, W.B. Du Bois, and Booker T. Washington. And Ida B. Wells actually falls not only into African American reformers, but also into our next topic, which will be the women's suffrage movement, or the right to vote for women. One of the things that became a common occurrence in the South were lynching mobs. And as you could tell by this picture, where you have a lynching victim here, you had over 1,000 African Americans by the 1890s that were killed in this way. Now, lynching mobs particularly took place in the South. If you guys look at this map, this is a map of before the Civil War. We're talking about in 1850, so slavery still existed, and the darker red spots meant that you had more slaves in that particular area. Now, take a look at this map. This map is post-Civil War, and you could actually see the number of people that were killed in the South through lynching mobs. So, for example, in Texas, you had 352. In New Jersey, for example, you had 1. So you could tell that the Deep South had a lot more lynching victims than up north or out west. African Americans began to speak out against this violence, and one of the first people to do that was actually Ida B. Wells, which was quite interesting because not only was she an African American speaking against anti-black violence, but she was also a woman. So she was a journalist, and she actually began her crusade because 3 of her friends were lynched when they started a business that competed, or that provided competition to a white business. And she urged African Americans to protest the lynchings of her 3 friends that happened to be in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, speaking out against the violence that was occurring in the African American community potentially made you a target. So she was asking a lot of the African Americans to speak out. And the very last quote that you see here that speaks out, if you don't fight against injustice, then you're likely to die in a trap. So she didn't want to just sit and take the violence that was occurring to African Americans, but she wanted to fight back and gain some equality. She also advocated for African Americans to stop riding the streetcars and to stop shopping at white stores. Support African American businesses. Carpool with each other so that you're not giving money to white companies, because if you hit people, or if you hit companies in the pocketbook, they're more likely to take a look at what's going on and to stop whatever practice they're doing that you're fighting against, than if you just continuously give them money and protest. If you stop giving them money, then you have more control and more power. And this amazing woman also successfully integrated whites and blacks during the suffrage movement. Now, the picture that you see here was actually a famous parade that took place, and this was in Washington, D.C., which we'll cover next week. And she didn't want to march in the back of the line with all the other African Americans. She wanted to march in the front right alongside her white counterpart, and she actually did that. Even though a few white people were against it, she didn't care. She marched right alongside her white counterparts in the suffrage parade. The founder of the Tuskegee Institute, which is a leading black college today, is actually a former slave who taught himself how to read and write. And this is this young man over here, Booker T. Washington. Washington writes his autobiography and names it Up From Slavery, and you can see the book over here. But he also talks about how he thought African Americans should live in the U.S. He stressed living in harmony and peace with the whites, so he didn't want to cause any protesting or any rebellions, anything of that nature. And he thought that African Americans needed to learn a specific trade, get a job, and then once you have a trade and you have a job and you're getting money, you're going to eventually achieve political and social equality. Don't fight for it. It will eventually come if you have a job and you're working hard. Not all African Americans supported Booker T. Washington's view. W.E.B. Du Bois, for example, was another African American leading intellectual and educator. He was a professor, he was an author, but he specifically disagreed with the way that Booker T. Washington said African Americans should live in the U.S. He wanted to fight back and he wanted to demand equality. So he actually formed the NAACP, or the NAACP as you guys would know it, with Jane Addams and Lincoln Steffens, but he's basically the main founder of it. And this gets formed in 1909. W.E.B. and Booker had very public disagreements and debates about how African Americans should strive for equality, and everyone pretty much knew that although they both wanted the same thing. They both wanted African Americans to obtain equality in society. They just both had different ways of actually reaching that goal, and it was very much publicized, and everyone in the intellectual world knew of the disagreements, and we are going to be focusing on their disagreements a lot more in class. Now, George Washington Carver actually studied at Booker T. Washington's school, and he became a very famous scientist that discovered hundreds of ways to use southern crops, in particular the peanut. Here's the beginning of a list of the various inventions of George Washington Carver. You can see that he specialized in a variety of dyes for clothing, different kind of face products, shampoo, shaving cream, as well as different products in the edible department. Caramel, my personal favorite, instant coffee, pancake flour. So he did a lot. Just take a look at this long list. And the list continues. It also goes on to various medicines. Things like laxatives is something that he created. And then finally, some more general things such as washing powder or laundry soap, gas, diesel fuel, axle fuel. So he did a lot of different things, and he dabbled in a lot of different things, and he got his education from a school that was started by Booker T. Washington. So even though this video didn't necessarily focus on the negatives of the Jim Crow South, we're going to be talking about that in class. This video particular focus on 4 people and their achievements and accomplishments in the African American community despite all the negative things of the Jim Crow South. So you should be able to tell me who Ida B. Wells is and what she did to fight against racism, the beliefs of Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois, and then finally George Washington Carver and a few of his inventions. Don't forget to answer your blog, and I'll see you guys tomorrow in class.